Well, hello everyone. I want to welcome you to this webcast presentation of the top 10 supply chain risk management insights of all time, presented by Resolink. I'm Bob Bowman, managing editor of Supply Chain Brain, and I'm pleased to introduce this webinar with two excellent speakers today. We have Bindya Vakil. She is Chief Executive Officer of Resolink and a recognized thought leader in the area of supply chain risk management. She has been a practitioner in high-tech supply chain management with companies including Flextronics, Cisco, and Broadcom. Ms. Vakil has a master's degree in supply chain management from MIT and an MBA in finance. She is a published author and frequent speaker at top supply chain conferences and universities on the subject of supply chain resiliency. Ms. Vakil was named a top female supply chain executive in 2013 by Supply and Demand Chain Executive. We're also joined as a speaker today by Anne Gracken. For more than 2 decades, Anne has been on the front line of supply chain management. As CEO of Chainlink, Ms. Gracken and her team have advised their clients on innovation and transformation, achieving dramatic improvements in business performance. Before starting Chainlink, Ms. Gracken was Managing Director of Supply Chain Risk at Marsh & McLennan, where she led the global consulting practice. She is also a popular speaker and a respected writer. Now, before we get going, I just want to remind everyone that we really want to hear from you in the audience. So at the end, we're going to be leaving time for your contributions. So if you have any insights you wish to share on your own ideas about the top supply chain risk management insights of all time, please do so at any time during the presentation by clicking on the Q&A and entering your question or your insight, and we will deal with them at the end. With that said, I'd like to get going, though, and turn it over to Bindya Vakil. Bindya?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Bob, and it's a pleasure to be here. And so let's get started. We have a really good event planned for here today for all of you. So before we get started, I just want a quick note of acknowledgement to the Global Supply Chain Resiliency Council and its members. This group of individuals directly shaped or indirectly influenced the development of this top 10 list. So I also want to give a few words of introduction about our process that we followed in putting this list together. So as we sourced ideas from the council members, we received over 100 different unique ideas from this crowd, and we organized and sorted these into many different threads and themes. We put related insights together and then ultimately distilled into these 10 topic areas. I'm using the word topic areas because each insight is really comprised of more than one thought. For example, in some cases it might be a collection of related ideas or thoughts, and in other cases there might be one primary thought and perhaps a few related corollaries. So while we marketed this webcast as a top 10 list, what constitutes as an insight is really what you as the beholder feel is the most important. We could have easily packaged this as the top 30 insights of all time. So the idea here is that you will really get your money's worth spending your time with this webcast because there is a tremendous amount of rich information that we're just about to share. Anne?
Yeah. Good day, everybody. And just supporting what Bindya said, there are so many ideas. So to provide a basic structure or organizing framework for the top 10 list, they've been organized into a few basic categories, talking about business case, people, process, and of course, technology. These will be unveiled in the order shown. So let's get started with the first insight that talks about making a business case for supply chain risk management.
Great, thank you. So this is very important, and one of the things that is very powerful that Jim Rice at MIT said was, while there are many different sources of risk to think of, there are a very limited number of outcomes, or what we would like to think of as impact to business. So as a result, there is a lot more leverage that we have in planning for the system overall to be resilient in response to the predictable few outcomes. This is very powerful. We all know that there are many different unpredictable sources of risk. I mean, if you look at Resolink, we offer the Event Watch service 24/7, which is our global monitoring service that tracks over 30 different ways that the supply chain can be disrupted at any given point of time. And these could be anything from factory fires, M&A activity in the supply chain, earthquake, hurricane, flood types of things, FDA or OSHA or EPA shutting a factory down, or a supplier change notification that could disrupt the supply of a part. What's really interesting is that at the end of the day, as all of these events play out in the system, there is a limited number of known outcomes that result from these events occurring. And at the end of the day, if you think about how they play out within our organizations, they really result in us using manpower utilization differently. So people get taken away from their day jobs to go figure out how this event's going to impact us. So there's a utilization rate impact. And then there are financial consequences, which could be more tactical consequences around freight expedites or us having to pay premiums for our raw materials or components. Or it could be a revenue impact as a result of us not being able to meet customer demand, or an allocation situation that causes us to go lines down or not build the appropriate amount of volume. Anne, would you like to add something?
Sure. I think the point is well taken that there are only so many impacts, if you will. And also for those impacts, there are only a few what I call relevant solutions or mitigation options. By focusing more on the impacts, which are common, versus causes, which are many and unpredictable, you don't divert your attention away from resiliency efforts that could protect your people, your assets, your financials, and customers from those impacts. So if you look at this example, the factory may have some issues. Again, there are many sources, but you begin to plan to ensure that you have solutions regardless of the cause. So with that said, we're going to take a little poll so we can get some audience feedback.
Okay, this will be the first of several polls that we'll be conducting during this presentation. Let's start with, let's see here. Okay. We're going to be asking these for the audience, and we're going to ask you to choose, make your choice, and then click on Submit. We do want to stress that you should only respond to this question and other questions as well if it's relevant to you and or your organization. In other words, consultants, solution partners, academics, and students, please do not respond. So here is the first poll question. Challenges in demonstrating strategic business value and a compelling business case and ROI analysis have significantly impacted our ability to launch and or expand our SCRM program. I agree completely. I agree somewhat. I neither agree nor disagree. I disagree somewhat. I disagree completely. So make your choice now if you are a relevant responder and click on Submit, and we're going to take a few seconds of silence here to give you folks time to make that choice. Going to leave it open for just about another 15 seconds or so, just to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to respond. All right. I'm going to close the poll now, and let's take a look at the results.
Okay. At least we have many people who agree with this or somewhat agree, but I'm going to move on here and talk more about this. On to the next insight. So, our next insight talks about supply chain risk management and resilience investments that can drive operational value, ROI, build market share, brand, and shareholder value. First, let me talk a bit about the myths. And then I want to dispel them. So our first myth is that risk is a low-level issue without strategic consequences, such as impacts to brand, revenue, and shareholder value. The other myth is that risk is not top of mind in the market. Well, it turns out that risk has become an area of increasing concern across multiple sectors. Every week there's a new working group, NGO, government task force responding to business and consumer concerns focused on supply chain risk issues in industries such as food, consumer goods, high tech, etc. And another myth is that hard ROI numbers are difficult to support. Well, this simply isn't true. It is not difficult to tie mitigation investments to revenue impact, as well as reductions in operating costs. I want to delve a bit more into these issues because I think they are so important to supply chain professionals. So let's look at some measures and benefits. Well, firstly, with insurance, we are starting to see direct benefits in terms of insurance premiums and coverage. In fact, according to Mark Mills at EMC Corporation, management treasury departments can use the successes in supply chain programs to improve supply chain insurance coverage. The lower your risk, the lower your premiums, in other words. And that's been showing up a great deal in many sectors in the supply chain. Now with shareholder value, in this slide you can see that Hasbro tracked Mattel stock very closely for many years until the supply chain event announced in 2007, if you all remember the issues with tainted toys. So you can see that after that, the stock prices diverged. In fact, there is a direct market impact to shareholder value when these events occur. Fire, weather, related, quality of products, etc. Not only do the day of the event there's an impact, but shareholder value often doesn't recover for months and sometimes years. In the Hasbro example, you can see it took over 6 years for their share price to recover. In our research as well at Chainlink, we tracked several sectors, high tech and the logistics industry, for several years and saw that there were direct shareholder impacts that did not improve over time. So, as far as operational and organizational risks such as shortages, plant and port slowdowns, or manufacturing equipment damage, these kinds of events happen all the time. And firms experience eroding performance leading up to these announcements on quarterly performance. And once an announcement is made showing the weakened picture of your performance, such as increased costs or reductions in sales due to lost or late orders, once this is revealed, of course the share price drops. But also, according to a study by Vinod Singhal at Georgia Tech, which showed over 800 companies that they tracked for several years, the average share price, it turns out, was sliding even before the announcement. So those eroding performance measures were beginning to show up, and they were being noticed by Wall Street. And their statistics showed, in fact, that it was about 12% erosion of shareholder value even before the public announcement. And afterwards, there was further erosion, which often did not recover for years. So there is an impact there to shareholder value. The other issue, which I think is important for companies to think about, is the recovery costs from events. These are directly measurable, and not all of them are covered by insurance policies, such as your property, casualty, business continuity policies, etc. Those insurance policies may cover the value of a lost physical asset or an injured employee, but they really don't address shareholder value, lost sales, and so on. So it's important, I think, for people to understand that without good plans and without good mitigation approaches, they can fall victim to these types of strategies. And Bindia, I know you have more to add here.
Yeah, I think so. Anne, as many of you, the majority, I think, responded in the poll that there is an impact to business case or your supply chain resiliency programs from an ROI standpoint. Being able to build the business case is a very important component. And Anne has just talked to you about how the business case can be a very robust business case around the strategic impact of disruptions, which are long-term and high levels from a shareholder value standpoint. What I'm going to talk about is that in addition to the long-term strategic value, there is a real ROI as well on from an operational standpoint. And this is something that I know for many supply chain professionals is near and dear to their hearts. So what you're seeing on the slide right now is the results of a recent study by PwC and the MIT Forum for Supply Chain Innovation, which looked at a lot of companies, and they segregated the performance of companies who have invested more heavily in supply chain risk and resilience programs. And specifically those companies who have achieved the higher maturity levels on the PwC maturity model, which would be level 3 and 4. And what they found was that these companies who have invested strategically in supply chain risk and resilience did perform much better than the lower maturity companies in terms of operational metrics like inventory turns, on-time delivery, lead time performance, cash-to-cash cycle times, cost of obsolescence, total asset turnover, and EBIT margin. So again, when we think about supply chain resiliency, the myth, if you will, is hard ROI numbers are difficult to support. Operational value can sometimes, for the operational objectives of supply chain resiliency, can sometimes be at loggerheads with the day-to-day operational metrics and targets that companies have. And what we're seeing in this study is that that is simply not true. Another very interesting insight from or thought from Matt Mills at EMC was that you really need to be very creative and look holistically when you drive initiatives and evaluate ROI. When you collaborate with internal departments and understand how the data that you are collecting and the initiatives that you are driving can help advance their interests in parallel, that is very powerful. So he gave the example of how sustainability teams often have similar interests in emergency preparedness practices and labor standards that they're likely driving with suppliers. And these best practices can also help reduce the risk of disruptions from strikes or riots, etc. So if I go to the next insight, this is an interesting one. It pertains to the way the people within the company have to think about supply chain risk in order for a supply chain risk resiliency program to be successful. There has to be a sea change in the thought process. Several interesting myths, if you will, again, in this area are, for example, people think oh, so if something happens, everyone got affected, we didn't get affected, we got lucky. Well, that's just not true because the reality is that someone somewhere in your company did something right at some point. Whether it was that they located a factory in a lower risk area, whether they sourced a part from a lower risk supplier, whether they chose to not put all your sourcing into one source or hold more inventory, there was something done that ensured that you weren't impacted like others were. So the thought that we were lucky needs to be removed, and we need to find those decisions, and we need to reward the people who made those decisions. The reality is we never really do that. The second very interesting one, and this was according to Joe Carson, who is the head of Global Operations Performance at Juniper Networks. And Joe said a key benefit of robust risk management program is that the team members that are used to understanding and reacting to the crisis, you know that you're there when a crisis occurs, and people show up to an emergency war room meeting with alternatives and proactive measures that they've already thought of to help respond and recover from this event. Normally, today what he's observing, what we are all observing, is that we walk into a war room meeting thinking our commodity managers can just gut their way through a problem. And often the purposeful approach where people show up with a plan is not exactly the way operational folks are used to thinking. Operational folks are used to saving the day with an extraordinary dive and catch. And so this is a very powerful mentality change that Joe brings out, that the diving catch approach is generally what we end up rewarding. People do get recognition for their diving catch approach, saving the day type of performance in a war room situation. Another issue that again deals with this, how we think about this problem, is that we all think risk can be managed just like a typical operational initiative, but also that we can think about risk as something that we can manage at an annual level, right, on an annual basis. And for a given organization, you know, if you invest in a best-in-class extensive mitigation program, that means that you think that, well, I have a best-in-class program, I'm proactively managing risk and mitigating things, my risk number should go down. Well, the reality is that it may not always go down. It could be that the environment is changing around us. A new product could be launched. Maybe the company acquired somebody, or the macroeconomic situation changed on us. So the risk picture, despite all our investments, suddenly could go up. So does that then follow that we do nothing? No, because having this capability is important. And so it is really critical not to think of risk as something we can just, treat as an operational program and expect that an investment here will directly result in a reduction in risk there.
Right. So, while we're talking about these myths, and this one's one of my favorites, is that big events affect the industry equally. It just isn't true. There's lots of data and case studies that show firms who are well prepared have lower impacts and recover more quickly. If you can recover more quickly, you can achieve a competitive advantage, of course, because your products are the ones that are on the shelf being sold versus your competitors. And of course, the converse is also true, that if you don't recover well, you're at a disadvantage. Critical thinking here for people to remember. And then, of course, the next one is that risks are interlinked. That is, symptoms that appear to pop up in one place may be symptoms of a wider issues. People don't see these or understand them since they don't have a chain-wide perspective, and they don't have a risk-aware perspective, and they don't have the data that tracks events and see how they relate to one another. So that's also critical there, that people really understand the integration, if you will, between all these small events and how they can build up into major consequences. So now we'll take another poll.
Okay, thank you, Ann. This one says, I believe supplier trust/collaboration/transparency is critical to SCRM program success, and I am confident that it can be achieved. I agree completely, somewhat, neither agree nor disagree, disagree somewhat, disagree completely. Again, click on Submit if you are a relevant responder. Please, consultants, solution partners, academics, and students do not respond. So let's take a few seconds and see what people say about this one. Okay, going pretty well. I'm going to leave it open for about another 15, 20 seconds. Okay. And our results.
Oh, good. I'm glad that there's more agreement here, if you will, and that leads us to our next insight. And this insight really talks about buy-in and cooperation from internal stakeholders within the four walls is no longer sufficient to manage risk. In fact, we need supplier collaboration and trust because we're so dependent on our suppliers for so much.
Yeah, agree. Completely agree as well. A key going-in benefit here is that for a change, when it comes to risk management and resiliency, our incentives are completely aligned. A resilient supplier is good for customers, good for suppliers. So it is very important to think about how education, coaching, and helping the suppliers build the broader supply chain capabilities will improve the supplier's overall business and help you as well. These capabilities are being built, that suppliers are building, will actually not only help suppliers be successful with their business with one customer, but all customers who are trying to raise the bar for their suppliers. The second one is it's very important not only to throw work at suppliers, but help reward the transparent, collaborative behavior that suppliers demonstrate working with customers in this journey. And then it is also important to think strategically here and not just think about one relationship, but actually help the supplier strategically succeed over time. And this could even involve, helping the supplier finding other customers to improve their financial stability. Yeah, sometimes it makes sense to help your suppliers find additional customers. That helps everyone in reality. And the final thing is, the objectives around resiliency and transparency have to be such that suppliers don't end up taking the brunt of effort and work on themselves. And so the published ones share multiple customer type of LinkedIn-like data sharing platforms and collaboration tools can substantially create efficiencies on part of suppliers who don't have to repeat data entry to share transparency and other information across their many customers. So another very good quote from Matt at EMC, Matt talks about balance. Matt's advice is balance mitigating specific risks with building broad capabilities. Maintaining focus on the management systems of suppliers can often drive bigger bang for the buck than managing specific risk areas. No one knows what will happen where, but everyone knows that something will happen somewhere. So guiding, coaching, educating, and collaborating with suppliers on best practices when it comes to either business continuity or good practice guideline standards will help suppliers to effectively recover from events more effectively and cost efficiently. Next one, Ann.
Great. Our next insight talks about supply chain mapping and visibility. So multiple sources don't work if all your sources have the same sub-tier supplier, that dreaded diamond-shaped supply network. A sub-tier supplier in this network configuration is what Dale Rogers and his colleagues at ASU, OCU, and Wayne State University refer to as a nexus supplier. And I'm sure we all have some of those. A nexus supplier is a supplier whose importance is derived by its position in the network and not necessarily by any intrinsic attributes like the value of the components that they supply. A great insight on that is from Rod McClay, Director of Supply Chain at Amgen. And his insight is, ignorance is not bliss. If you develop awareness, it will take a lot less work to mitigate the risks in your supply chain. Amgen had multiple sources of key supply, only to find out that their tier one all use the same sub-tier supplier. Rod warns against what he calls the ostrich view of supply chain. And along with that is a related myth we found in our research, which is, I can rely on my suppliers to address risk issues, be financially stable, address sustainability, responsibility, and perform legally and ethically. It turns out that many of the tier one companies thought their tier two suppliers were addressing these issues down the chain, and in reality, they're not doing that. We've seen in our research many times, with high statistical reporting, that the tier three suppliers are not included in audit and reporting. So, Bindaya, I know you have more to add on this one.
Yeah, and that's a great insight from Rod for sure, thinking about the ostrich view. Another really good thought from Joe Carson at Juniper Networks. Joe says that managing the details of an N-tier supply base is table stakes in running a contemporary business these days. He says that we're seeing new customer requirements for socially responsible supply chains, as well as new SEC regulations that require companies to monitor component content. All of these, in addition to the need for resilient supply chains, require companies to really understand and map those connections between suppliers, understand the location of factories, and how global events will affect us. All of these things make it really mandatory to gather and manage an immense set of information. Companies need to organize and recognize these needs and organize this effort so that this can happen in an efficient way. Anne?
Okay, and now we're moving on to our insight number 6. This one I think also is important when we think about risk identification. Smaller, more frequent supply chain events have a greater aggregate business impact than the major infrequent events that occur. In fact, day-to-day activities can be just as damaging and, in fact, happen to most companies. So focus on a once-in-a-decade event misses the whole point. Firms experience erosion of performance, often day-to-day, due to internal events, employee issues, quality, down equipment, and so on, and this happens all the time. So metrics such as increasing cycle time, failure rates, and so on should be looked at as early warning indicators. These show up in lost sales or increased days sales outstanding. And for public companies, where these announced metrics come up on a quarterly basis, of course, as we talked about, this affect shareholder value?
Yeah, this is a great point. And I think what Matt and Joe and Rachel and Rod and everyone that we are hearing from today are all saying this again and again. It's really the distinction between managing a risk here or there versus building a capability holistically. Instead of managing earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, etc., we really are talking about here managing with intelligence and information who we buy from, how much inventory we hold, whether we second source or not, and we create that robust, intelligent platform that drives resilient decisions for these areas. Now, if we have that capability that is rooted in information, then whether the disruption is because a supplier changed a part on us or a quality issue happened somewhere, or we had a massive earthquake or hurricane, a resilient supply chain and that is flexible, information-driven, and fast responding can react and recover effectively on any of those to any of those disruptions. And
right. Yes. And so here's another one of my favorites about the so-called black swan events. In reality, a black swan event is really a group of scenarios that catch supply chain professionals uninformed or unaware. In most cases, so-called black swan events are really about lack of data. There are, in fact, early warning and information foreshadowing most of these events if we think about it. We just didn't have access and visibility to those warnings. This preoccupation with the so-called black swan events, these infrequent disasters, if you will, have two important negative impacts to be perceived and need to think about in terms of your own preparation. The first one is this preoccupation with the black swan, and I think it distracts organizations from focusing on these smaller, almost daily impacts, which can be easily remedied, yet they may have a larger aggregate business impact. The second one, I think, is also critical, is that many people believe that these acts of God, if you will, by definition, can't be predicted, so preparing for them is futile. Again, there are all these early warnings and information foreshadowing most of these events. The issue is that most organizations haven't developed the visibility systems and the process to respond to those early warnings. In essence, they're uninformed and unaware about these impending events. India?
yeah, and you know, this was again back to Jim Rice's point at the very beginning. Just because black swan events occur and the fact that they cannot be predicted doesn't mean you cannot prepare, because again, as he pointed out, there are a few sets of outcomes that you really need to manage for and prepare for. So therefore, rather than looking at past events to try to predict the future, the best defense is to really quantify and identify those hotspots, those weaknesses, and those vulnerabilities moving forward so that you can mitigate where those weaknesses are in your supply chain and assure that you have resiliency built into the process. You know, the other thing that's interesting is that rare events or rare impacts really not that rare anymore. You know, we have a world where supply chains are so interconnected that rare isolated events are becoming more and more common. Yeah, whether you believe it or not, in global warming and climate change, we are seeing weather-related events are on the rise. Our supply chain is all over the world, so we are vulnerable to threats in all parts of the world. Cyber attacks are increasing. Worsening the problem is that we have lean inventories, short market windows, which are creating black swan scale impact from smaller scale events. So things that previously did not relate into a disaster, result in a disaster scenario, might suddenly, because there's no slack in the supply chain, cause crisis scale impact. And then finally, we're in this new world where our customers are less loyal and they are less forgiving. And so if a product isn't available, chances are that we've lost the lifetime revenue associated with that product. So again, another example of black swan impact of events or disruptions that previously may not have had that big of an impact. The next one I'll go to, this is my favorite one. I think it's probably humanity's first documented supply chain risk insight. If you've all heard the phrase, for want of a nail, a kingdom was lost. This is really that event. This is really that insight which talks about parts or components or raw materials that are small in spend but high revenue impacting. We have words like tantalum capacitors and acetonitrile that can send a shudder through the hearts of people in the high-tech or life science industries. I myself have lived through examples of labels that are anti-counterfeit type labels, single site, single source, single supplier, no replacement, goes on every single product that gets shipped out the door, and nothing can go out the door without that label. 100% of revenue tied to a single point of failure in the supply chain. So a really, really critical insight, I think, for all of us supply chain people, and this demonstrates why it is really important for us to really quantify how a supplier, how a site, how a part impacts the overall revenue tied to the company. The next one is a personal favorite of mine. It talks about design for resiliency. The way I look at it is that, the decisions that we made at product design are the problems that we're going to live with in future throughout the life of that product, right? By the time a product goes to first customer ship or becomes generally available, it's already too late to build resiliency in a cost-effective fashion. The best opportunity is really to do that thorough risk assessment at every design gate review process and identify what new problems have we designed into this for ourselves. Now, obviously, we don't have to de-risk everything. That's not the point. The point is sometimes a supplier might have the IP that we need, or the cost and time to market isn't possible without that supplier or part being in our product. However, this is the time when we have the greatest opportunity to negotiate, take a different path, write different terms into our contract. The supplier is interested in winning this business. We have a lot of leverage and power in the relationship. This is the time when you can impact how this plays out if the worst case scenario does happen. Therefore, without having to change the decision itself, going into this decision with a mitigation strategy planned is a very, very powerful thing. And this is something that really all robust, mature supply chain resiliency programs should really strive for.
Yeah, you know what? I think that this really points to an organization that's risk aware or has that risk management thinking. I mean, we all know in health as well as business, the earlier you address issues, especially upstream in the supply chain, the lower the impact and the lower the cost if an event occurs to products and customers and employees, and of course reputation as well, since you don't want to get a poor quality product out into the marketplace. In our virtual world of offshoring and outsourced, and this really points to really developing those mature risk-aware supplier relationships and making that a focus and building that relationship of trust with the suppliers. So let's move to our last insight. This is another one that I really like. I'm allowed to say that technology is really important. And I think this is about really living with and depending, if you will, on a more of a centralized cloud system and the analytics to go with it. So many organizations are still using Excel and Outlook as tools to manage their supply chain. These tools don't integrate, they don't communicate well, and they don't scale. And when it comes to managing your risk, you really need a rich source of uninterrupted data. And that's going to come from a centralized cloud system which integrates these multiple data streams. A lot of people talk about big data or unstructured data and so on. And that's social and mobile, and having the advanced analytics that really looks at that information and can really understand what's going on. You know, we found in our research that organizations are just clamoring for visibility systems across their supply chain, and they rate supply chain visibility as a top issue. So users need the data and need to be able to distill that really quickly to understand the impacts, and not just the impacts, what are my options? Spreadsheets and continuity books on the shelf just don't allow that kind of accurate assessment of the issue and the ability to communicate and implement a solution also quickly.
Yep, supply chains generate a vast amount of data. It is very easy to get lost in this data or spend a lot of resources and budget on just finding out the insights or the nuggets out of that data. And these could be the most critical, highest risk part sites, suppliers, etc. So it's very important nowadays to have systems that provide out-of-the-box analytics, prioritization, algorithms, single points of failure, automation of some of these analytics out of the vast streams of data to surface the most critical issues. If you think about the world we live in and the developments in the external technology space in the last decade itself, we have, like Anne said, cloud, social networking, mobile, etc. We're in this world of smart everything. We have smartphones, smartwatches, smart TVs. We need a smart supply chain. What do we mean by that? We mean we manage our supply chain now with information rather than inventory, leveraging the best in cloud, best in social networking and mobile to create that smart workforce that can react quickly and cost effectively to whatever comes at us out of left field going forward. So I think with that, we have a poll to go to, our last poll for today.
Okay, let's do this quickly so we leave a little time for insights at the end. The statement is as such: I believe new cloud, mobile, and analytics technology is transforming or has the potential to transform the way companies manage supply chain risk and achieve resiliency. Agree completely, agree somewhat, neither agree nor disagree, disagree somewhat, I disagree completely. Again, relevant responders only, please. Take a few seconds here. Let's hear what people have to say. Okay, results starting to come in here. About 10 more seconds. And closing that out. And there we are.
Well, great. I think we completely agree as well. I think so. This is terrific. You know, what I want to just do as we bring it all together today, we've discussed the top 10 insights as a simple framework or something that is really, really powerful. This is a broad topic. It fundamentally changes how we think about our business. You know, as Wayne at Resolink says, institutionalizing resiliency does not mean buy software, but look holistically and change the way we behave when no one is looking. I think that is so powerful. These insights we have shared today, these are a complete program that span all of these areas above. So here are two next steps we recommend that you take. One is, continue this discussion today. If you felt this was interesting and valuable, please join us on LinkedIn. We have a group, Global Supply Chain Resiliency Council, a group of over almost 1,000 individuals worldwide who are passionate about this field. There's no membership fee. You are able to access this community and participate in learnings and discussions and get the help you need as you are going about building this capability, making the business case, identifying the first steps to take. This is a group of people who can really help you get started in a quick, accelerated way. Don't reinvent the wheel. The other thing we urge you to do, and that will be a great resource again as you get started along this journey, no matter where you are in the journey, this ultimate guide to supply chain resiliency success is a really strong white paper that compiles a lot of the discussions that we had today, but elaborates on them, talks about the best practices, gives you the frameworks, the governance models, the engagement models, etc., to help set this up successfully within your organization. And with that, I think what we've all been waiting for, let's hear from you. We want to hear from you what is the greatest supply chain risk or resiliency insight from your standpoint.
Okay, I'll take over from there. Thank you, Bindia. It seems like a lot of the comments from the audience so far are more in the form of questions. We do invite you to contribute your own insights as to what you consider to be the biggest supply chain risks as they affect your business. But I will pose a couple of questions here for our two speakers and see what they have to say about that. This is a reference, I believe, it says to, I think we're referring to slide number 8. It says, sometimes better to consider lost margin versus lost revenue. An impact to a high margin sale is greater than a sale on a low margin product. Anybody want to comment on that question of margin versus value versus revenue?
I'd love to. I totally agree with that. Firstly, again, lots of times companies think about their revenue numbers and they're not looking at profit. The key here is you have to have the data to be able to figure that out. And most companies don't know how to track the impact of a short supply, if you will, to their revenue. The example earlier about the missing button and you can't ship the coat. A button maybe costs 50 cents and the coat might be selling for $500. So you really need the information to be able to make those decisions. So I totally agree with the question. And again, the issue is, do you have the systems to help you make those kinds of decisions?
Okay, thank you. Bindia, did you want to comment or should we move on?
Nope, let's go to the next one.
This one might be a little bit tough to break off and chew in the source of a few seconds, but maybe some quick answers to this question. In what ways can supply chain risk management be broken down?
Broken down in terms of a methodology or a process, the way I would say it would be you look at it in terms of where do you start, what is the foundational thing that you need to do, and I would say that very simplistically, you want a proactively mapped, continuously monitored supply chain, right? And you want that supply chain to be mapped not just at the supplier level, but going down to sites and part level, because the reality is that is our operational, the reality is supply chain practitioners work at the supplier sites, parts and product level. So if you were to ask me, I would say because the question is pretty broad and it doesn't say broken down from a technology standpoint, I'm addressing it more from a steps that you take in order to have a robust program. I would say it starts with mapping, collecting the information, identifying those single points of failure would be the next thing, quantifying which failure point is more critical versus another. And this can be done in terms of, like Anne talked about just now, impact to business, revenue impact, or impact to brand. Also in terms of risk score, whether it's financial risk of a supplier, location risk of a site, recovery risk of a supplier at a given site for a given part, or sourcing risk, whether it's single source, dual source, etc. All of these together help you consolidate and bring up the failure points, which are high impact, single source, supplier sites or parts that have that are difficult for you to react or find an alternate source or location for. So those would be the critical ones that you need to address first. Simultaneously, you want a monitoring process that is continuously scanning and sensing for things that are happening worldwide that could disrupt your supply chain. And would you like to take a different view of this question?
Yeah, I would, which is, I agree with everything you're saying, but I would just be additive here and tell people to step back. And there's a lot of really good information on the internet about business continuity planning. Kaizen programs and Six Sigma programs are extremely helpful. Most organizations actually have a lot of team information, if you will, about what's going wrong internally, what's going wrong with their trading partners. So a lot of that information is available. You just need to process through that in a team setting and pick a process that allows you to step back and look at what's going on in the business. But again, some of the insights earlier about if you get really focused in on, how many times do we have a flood, you may miss a point of, guess what, every week or something we seem to have a slowdown on the line, or this route that we take to deliver products always seems to be slower than the other one. So I think there's a lot of information that organizations have, but applying a systematic approach towards looking at the business and then understanding how you mitigate some of these business impacts, if you will, is kind of the way to go.
Okay, here's a big one. Changing regulatory environment. Could be a reference to things like Sarbanes-Oxley, new environmental rules, food safety, conflict minerals, you name it, anything that has to do with risk in the supply chain. Your comments, please.
Sure. Yes, all of the above, and all of those legislations and regulations have been in response to consumer concerns. And that's across the world, in the EU, the US, et cetera, and today we're all global. And so, again, these are your customers who have been saying these are issues for us, otherwise these regulations would never be passed. So our attitude is learn about them, but then figure out how to leverage them. When I was at Marsh, one of our colleagues wrote a book about risk management and, seeing it as the upside. So how can I use these kinds of compliance mandates, if you will, as a competitive advantage? Use them for brand awareness. I don't trade in conflict minerals, or I comply with the Lacey Act, or any of these kinds of things. A lot of these green products, back to that question on margin, a lot of the green products are more revenue and more margin. So there could be a real upside for companies. And one other thing, I just really want to squeeze this in because it's really important. During the dog food scandal, there were one or two companies who had visibility across their supply chains, and when all the other brands were taken off the shelf, their brand was still there, and they were busy selling their product, and other people weren't. So again, compliance maybe isn't a bad thing.
Thank you, Anne. Bob, do we have time for one more insight?
Mindy, I have one. Insight is someone shared, you need to think of the extended supply chain as a vast horizontal organization, an intangible organization that needs to be managed, eschewing traditional hierarchical techniques. I'll read that again. Need to think of the extended supply chain as a vast horizontal organization, an intangible organization that needs to be managed, eschewing traditional hierarchical techniques. Interesting. Any thoughts on that?
I do if you don't, India. I agree with that. And B, if you think about what could affect your supply chain, again, this idea that it's not hierarchical. First, it's any employee. It's any supplier. It's any trading partner. It's the communities in which you operate in. A couple of years ago, Coke in India, I think they were protesting about their consumption of water, right? It's had a severe impact on production and sales in that country. So I agree, you have to step back and not only look at your material flows, but as India said earlier, what's going to affect those material flows in terms of weather and other kinds of events, and then step back again and look at the communities that you're operating in and the people and how you're managing them in terms of community relations, ethics, and all that. And I think it's a big picture to look at, but I think for supply chain people, it's very rewarding if they do think that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, this is very interesting. The comments are very, very thought-provoking. A couple of light bulbs going off in my head as we speak. But, when the swine flu pandemic happened, government reaction, how media covers an event can all have a huge impact on how things actually play out. For example, in Mexico, in response to the coverage and media and all the concerns, the government shut down schools. And when schools shut down, people had to stay home to take care of their kids, and factories went down as a result for several weeks. So absolutely, supply chain is very much broader than just the products, suppliers, and parts. When events happen, everything within the external environment does have an impact on how things play out. We saw that with 9/11 in government response. We saw that with the Iceland volcano. And it really is a big interconnected world that we live in. Great insight. I think we're out of time. Back to you, Tom.
Yeah, we are, unfortunately. I wish we had more time, but we're risking going over. So I want to thank Bindia Vakil and Ann Gracken so much for their fantastic observations on the top 10 supply chain risk management insights of all time. And I especially want to thank our audience for participating in the poll questions and in your insights at the end as well. So thanks again to everybody for being with us today, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you all.